The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump is quickly turning into what I am referring to as Orange Bill Cosby, or if you prefer, Bill Cosby 2.0. Numerous women now coming out and saying Donald Trump, the Republican presidential candidate, inappropriately touched them. Some of these allegations involve teens. The situation is getting to be absolutely insane, and Trump's campaign is imploding. Let's start, of course, you might remember over the weekend, the leaked audio of Donald Trump speaking to Billy Bush in 2005 exposed Donald Trump talking very lewdly about what he does to women, including kissing them or touching them, no matter what it is that they want, also referring to grabbing women's genitals. Now we realize that what Trump said during that second presidential debate, these are just words. Well, it's words indicative of actions that Donald Trump has apparently taken multiple times. Donald Trump said, I've not done anything wrong. These are just words. But now the stories of Donald Trump inappropriately touching women have started to pour in. We will start with a New York Times report summarizing some of them. We will start with Jessica Leeds, now 74 years old, reporting that more than 3 decades ago, when she was traveling as a businesswoman for a paper company, she sat next to Trump on an airplane in the first class cabin to New York. They had never met before. Shortly after takeoff, Trump lifted the armrest and started touching her, grabbing her breasts, trying to put his hand up Ms. Lee's skirt. He was like an octopus, is the way that she described the incident. She went to the back of the plane and sees this as an assault. She mentioned this to a friend who confirmed the story to the New York Times and said, this is exactly as she told me about this decades ago. Rachel Crooks was at one point a 22-year-old receptionist at Bayrock Group, which it's a real estate investment firm in Trump Tower, encountered Donald Trump in an elevator in 2005. She knew that Trump did business with her company. She turned to introduce herself to Trump. They shook hands, and then Trump wouldn't let go, instead starting to forcefully kiss her, and then directly kissing her on the mouth, moving from the cheeks to the mouth. She said this was no accident. It was a violation. She called her sister at the time, who also spoke to the New York Times and confirmed the story. Now, here's my favorite part. The really insane, revealing part of the New York Times story yesterday about these sexual assault claims against the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, is how Trump reacted to the New York Times asking him about it. Here's a transcript of this piece of the conversation from the New York Times article, which says, in a phone interview on Tuesday night, a highly agitated Mr. Trump denied every one of the women's claims. None of this ever took place, said Mr. Trump, who began shouting at the Times reporter who was questioning him. He said that the Times was making up the allegations to hurt him and that he would sue the news organization if it reported them. You are a disgusting human being, he told the reporter as she questioned him about the women's claims. This is how he reacts. Trump can't even handle questions from a newspaper about alleged sexual assaults. How would he be able to handle anything about being president of the United States? But it's not just these two women. In People magazine, Natasha Stoynoff said that she and Trump walked into a room alone. Trump shut the door behind them. She turned around, and within seconds, Trump was pushing her against the wall and forcing his tongue down her throat. And then, of course, we have the story of Mindy McGillivray, or maybe it's pronounced McGillivray, in the Palm Beach Post, who said that back in 2003, Trump grabbed her rear. The Trump campaign has not yet responded to the story. But it's not just these 4 women either. There are 4 women who competed in the 1997 Miss Teen USA beauty pageant who said Donald Trump just came into the dressing room while we were changing. There were 15-year-old girls in there naked, and Trump just walks in, women given no time at all to cover up, nothing announced ahead of time. Numerous women, including Miss Vermont Teen USA, Mariah Bilodeau, saying, I turn around and there's a man in there, and I'm not wearing any clothes. This is what Trump has bragged about doing, Pat. I mean, there is just no mystery here. Trump has bragged about this, and now the stories are pouring in. There's no inconsistency.
And of course, it's an issue of great public interest.
Yeah.
All of these women are coming forward with about a month left in the election. And really, there's no reason to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, given the comments that he said.
No. If anything, Trump's comments tell us, oh, yeah, this is just people corroborating what Trump said that he does. And remember, his campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, said all women deserve to be heard in regards to sexual misconduct allegations. Well, we're hearing them now, and I hope Kellyanne Conway supports that. And remember, Donald Trump once said, nobody has more respect for women than I do. Fortunately, that's not true. Hillary Clinton should leave this alone. Trump is imploding on his own. Hillary Clinton does not need to get involved in this. Just keep showing up, keep answering the questions, including at the last, third and final presidential debate next week. Trump is imploding, down by double digits in multiple national polls at this time. Now, it doesn't just stop with the 4 women plus all of the Miss Teen USA pageant contestants who have accused Trump of misconduct, as the New York Times and other publications reported earlier. Donald Trump's rape trial has been scheduled for a hearing, and numerous accusers are now surfacing. Federal Judge Ronnie Abrams has ordered a December status conference hearing after a woman who calls herself Jane Doe filed a lawsuit claiming that Donald Trump raped her when she was 13 years old in the 1990s. Now, I've talked about this 2 or 3 times now. Corporate media does not want to pick this up. And even when some pundits, talking heads on corporate media mention, by the way, there is a lawsuit against Trump and Jeffrey Epstein for rape, corporate media seems to want to go away from that. This is the 3rd attempt that the plaintiff has made in filing this particular lawsuit. Last Friday, she filed an amended complaint with a new witness named Joan Doe, who will apparently corroborate the plaintiff's allegations. This dates back to 1994-95, and this new Joan Doe says, Jane Doe told me exactly what it is that she is alleging in the lawsuit, sexual contact by Mr. Epstein and Donald Trump. The complaint alleges in no uncertain terms that Jeffrey Epstein had a woman pick up teenage girls from their homes for his famous parties. One of these girls was the plaintiff in this lawsuit. And there's another witness named Tiffany who provided an affidavit in the lawsuit who says she personally saw Donald Trump and Epstein rape the plaintiff several times. We're talking about a kid here. Of course, Donald Trump has repeatedly denied the allegations. Now, for all the pussy talk that Trump has tried to redirect to Bill Clinton, who's not running for president, Trump has some real problems here. I don't know, Pat, whether this is Bill Cosby 2.0 or whether we should call it Herman Cain Redux or just Orange Bill Cosby, as I like to call it. But these are major, major issues just 3 weeks out from the campaign. Now, conveniently, this hearing is not until December. So some have written to me saying, this is deliberate so that it won't affect the election. I think the entire Trump sexual assault situation is absolutely affecting the election right now. The polls show that.
Well, could you imagine if things do swing and he does get elected? Then you have the president-elect going to court proceedings over a rape case. I mean, that's just not going to play well in the public eye.
Imagine for a second, November 8th, Trump is elected president of the United States. November 9th, he is now the president-elect, not scheduled to be sworn in until January. And December 16th, or whatever exact day this is, he has to show up to defend himself at a case where he is accused of raping a minor. I mean, it is just out of this world. And as I mentioned earlier, countless women now coming out of the woodwork. Also, Erin Burnett, CNN host Erin Burnett, in addition to all the other claims, she said, a personal friend of mine told me that Donald Trump just forcibly started kissing her on the lips and completely unwanted sexual contact. That is what we call assault, ladies and gentlemen. And it is absolutely unbelievable that this is going on. If we were to write this, the day Trump announced his candidacy, if we were to say, he's going to win the nomination, and then after that, he is going to implode by doing everything from ridiculing disabled journalists to being accused of inappropriate sexual contact known to many as sexual assault by multiple women, I wouldn't have believed it. I don't know if many people in our audience would have believed it. In the midst of scandal after scandal from the Trump campaign, though, and we've talked about the rape trial, we've talked about the sexual assault allegations, there's a whole other issue that Donald Trump is having right now. It can be sort of easy to get away from the more traditional predictors of how an election will go when one of the nominees is being accused by countless women of sexually assaulting them and making fun of disabled people and ridiculing anybody that you can imagine. But there's a bigger picture problem that Donald Trump has. One of these issues is President Obama's approval rating. Generally speaking, a high approval rating for the president that's in office tends to be better for the presidential candidate of the same party. So in this case, President Obama is a Democrat, a fact that is probably not lost on many in our audience. As a result, a good approval rating for President Obama is better for Hillary Clinton, also running as a Democrat. As it happens, President Obama's approval rating has hit a new high. There is a recent CNN ORC poll where the president's approval rating has hit 55%. This is the highest mark of the entire second term, and it ties the high mark from President Obama's first term. This is continuing a really strong streak for President Obama of an upticking approval rating. A year ago at this time, it was about 10 points lower than it is now. And one interesting internal statistic is that if we look just among white voters, President Obama does much better with educated white voters than he does with uneducated white voters, right? 55% of whites with college degrees approve of President Obama's work as president. Only 44% of whites without college degrees like the job that President Obama is doing. So this is very, very interesting. And this is above and beyond the personal and specific Trump scandals. If people are by and large happy with President Obama, and I know 55% sounds like barely more than half, but in the polarized world we live in, 55% is really good. That helps Hillary Clinton, doesn't it?
Yeah, 55% for presidential approval numbers is pretty high. And I think part of it, too, is people are seeing the next two potential presidential candidates, Trump and Clinton, and they're like, well, maybe we could just have 4 more years of Obama. That would be preferable.
A lot of Trump's campaign has been centered around accusing Hillary Clinton of promising 4 more years of President Obama. Now, in some areas, that's more true. In some areas, that's less true. But when 4 years of President Obama, or in this case, 8 years of President Obama, are ranked pretty favorably by voters, there's not much of an advantage to running against the Obama record. And this is not my opinion. Personally, I've had countless critiques of the Obama administration, and we've covered those for nearly 8 years. But from a purely mathematical standpoint, when the president is relatively well-liked, that's not a good situation to run against the president's record as a way of running against your opponent. Now, in spite of having aggressive and spiteful haters, and President Obama has many of those, I think it's pretty clear at this point that President Obama's presidency will be seen by history books as impactful and in many ways very positive. And I know that that angers the haters. I know that progressives, real progressives, have significant issues with much of what President Obama has done in many areas. That is not what I am talking about. What I am saying is, in the context of what presidents can do and what presidents have done, it's getting harder to make the objective case that President Obama's 2 terms will be seen as a real failure. The economy significantly rebounding, the standing of the U.S. around the world significantly rebounding from the embarrassing status under the George W. Bush administration, progress when it comes to many social issues, significant changes in terms of foreign policy, at least in terms of troops around the world, even though, of course, we have seen ISIS rise in the wake of the harebrained decision by George W. Bush to go into Iraq. I have no doubt, and all we can do is wait and see if history vindicates what I'm saying, that historically President Obama is going to be seen as an effective president, aside from whether you agree with his politics. Send me your thoughts on that. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. We will take a break and be back with more after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Tommy Garcia. Tommy, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. Please join Tommy by signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. This is viewer and listener supported media. We exist because of memberships like Tommy's, and you can sign up on our website. And remember that if you ever shop on Amazon, the shopping you do can support the work that we do if you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before shopping. I have big marijuana news, not from the United States, but from the United Kingdom. The British government's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, that's a mouthful, has found that cannabidiol, also known as CBD, has a, quote, restoring, correcting, or modifying effect on physiological functions when administered to humans. This is a really big deal because for the first time, the British government is saying, we recognize officially the medicinal potential of cannabis. The UK government has said there is medical value here. And this was a review done of CBD, which is the cannabinoid that accounts for about 40% of what is extracted from the marijuana plant. It does not contain THC. THC is the psychoactive component of marijuana. CBD does not contain THC, but it's purported to retain the health benefits. And this all stemmed from a conversation about CBD vaporizer company MediPen. And this is in stark contrast to the petition that has been batted away by the Home Office in the UK, saying that cannabis can unquestionably cause harm to individuals and society. So to break it down for you, here in the US, marijuana, Schedule I drug, meaning it is considered the most dangerous, most addicting, most potentially damaging of all drugs in that category. The Home Office in the UK had something similar, which is they categorized marijuana as unquestionably causing harm to individuals and society. Now that we have this declaration from this arm of the British government administration, we can open research further, and you can start to loosen some of the very, very oppressive restrictions on marijuana research. Now, I still am concerned that here in the United States, we have these 5 states that are going to be voting on marijuana legalization in November, including here in Massachusetts. I'm worried that if we ever completely legalize cannabis, it's going to be because we just can no longer afford to lock everybody up, not because it's actually the correct, ethical, sensible thing to do. And I know some will hear me say that and they'll say, well, what matters is the end, not the means or the reason. And to a certain degree, I agree with that. But really, we need a total paradigm shift here in the United States when it comes to cannabis, legalizing marijuana. And what's really, really shocking to me, Pat, is that when we review the studies on the medical benefits of marijuana, it's not like they're difficult to find. There are so many studies. I mean, I just randomly looked and said, let's just see what medical studies there are already in the US about marijuana. There's one, for example, called Cannabis-Derived Substances in Cancer Therapy, an emerging anti-inflammatory role for the cannabinoids. This is by Louis and others from 2010. There's another one called Inhibition of Glioma Growth in Vivo by Selective Activation of the CB2 cannabinoid receptor by Sanchez and others. I'm not just going to read titles of studies to you now. There are hundreds of these, and this is with research being difficult to do, which say there's real potential for cancers and so many other conditions here in the United States. Maybe someone in the U.S. government will take direction from what's going on in Britain right now.
Because the evidence is pretty clear cut at this point.
Yeah.
And of course, we both support the recreational legality of marijuana.
Yeah.
But medical use, approving it, is the important first step. And if someone has glaucoma or epilepsy or cancer, I mean, how can you go to someone and they're experiencing very minimal side effects, no harm to anyone else? How can you tell them that they're not able to use that drug?
Yeah, well, it's circular. The reasoning is circular. You can't use that because it's Schedule I. Well, why does it make sense for it to be Schedule I? It's like when you go to a company and there's some insane policy that doesn't make any sense, and you say, well, but that doesn't make sense. Can't we do something different about this? And they say, I wish we could, but that's just the policy. Well, the policy is arbitrary. We've created the policy, and it's time for us to take responsibility and fix the policy. It's absolutely insane, and some good news from the UK about this moving in the right direction. I want to talk a little bit about foreign policy now. During a town hall event in New Hampshire recently, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump expressed contempt, to put it lightly, for Hillary Clinton's plan to fight terrorist groups like ISIS. Now, of course, most of Donald Trump's comments about Hillary Clinton and ISIS have been just fabricated lies, like, for example, that Hillary Clinton has been fighting ISIS her entire adult life. Trump has been criticized for not publicly discussing the details of how would you fight terror, how would you defeat ISIS, etc. He had the bright idea at this event in New Hampshire to say, hey, what about attacking first for once? I guess reminiscing about the good old days of preemptive war. I guess preemptive wars like the one he claimed to oppose in Iraq, but actually said he'd be in favor of on the Howard Stern show. I know, I can't figure it out any more easily than you can. Here's audio and video of Trump saying, what if we struck first once?
Isn't there an element of surprise? Remember when we were young and we were studying history and they talk about some of the great generals and the great attacks? And it was called the element of surprise. Wouldn't it be nice if we attacked first and talked about our great victory later?
Yeah.
Now, seriously, who's going to...
I like how the audience first starts laughing like, yeah, that's funny. Yeah. Oh, he's serious. Oh, well, now I'm going to clap. Hopefully a few people in that room considering crying, because that's really the reaction I should be having. Question one is, attack who first, right? I mean, I'll tell you, if I were Trump, I guess I would say the people who would be attacked, they know who they are, and they've been killing us for a long time. But let me just say, they wouldn't see it coming. That much I can tell you. Trust me. That's the Trump explanation for who we attack first. And one of the biggest things that Trump supporters were going after Hillary Clinton over the last few weeks has been, look at all the wars Hillary Clinton will start. There's one candidate now reminiscing about how nice it would be to attack somebody first. It's not Hillary Clinton, Pat. It's Donald Trump. How is this not obvious to the Trumpsters, the trumpeters who say Hillary's going to get us into a ton of wars, but it's your candidate who's glorifying preemptive strikes?
And you remember, too, I mean, not long ago, 10 years ago, we did attack a country first, Iraq, and it didn't end up so well.
No.
I mean, cost us trillions, 4,000 of our own troops dead, and up to 1 million Iraqis. So, and that was a war that he supported.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, now he'll say he didn't support it, but there's multiple interviews where he did seem in favor of it. Bottom line, he just didn't have any clue about anything and said whatever came to mind at the time. And there's a trend of this with Trump. Trump suggested that it would be an okay and acceptable and reasonable thing for more countries to have nuclear weapons. Donald Trump expressed confusion as to why nuking Europe would be so crazy and should be off the table. Trump has talked multiple times about preemptive war. And of course, there was that horrifying incident from Morning Joe on MSNBC where it was reported that in a meeting, a 1-hour meeting, 3 times, Trump was confused about why we couldn't just nuke other countries and why it would be such a big deal. So very, very disturbing. Now, if you're a Christian and you've been paying attention to Trump's pro-war rhetoric, wouldn't it be nice if we struck first? More countries should have nuclear weapons. It shouldn't be that big of a deal if we use nuclear weapons on somebody else. If you're a true Christian and you actually follow many of the teachings of Jesus Christ, which I don't, but I know many people in this country do, you would probably think there's really nothing compatible between my Christian values and those of Donald Trump. Although Donald Trump did receive a plurality of the evangelical vote in the Republican primary. Earlier this campaign season, 78% of white evangelical Christians said, I plan to vote for Donald Trump. Now, the flagship magazine of evangelical Christianity is blasting Donald Trump and slamming Christians who plan to vote for Trump. Here is a quote that I want to put up for you and discuss from Christianity Today. This is from editorial director Andy Crouch. Now, as a reminder, Christianity Today was founded by evangelist Billy Graham in 1956. Okay, that's for context as to what magazine this is coming from. Quote, Enthusiasm for a candidate like Trump gives our neighbors ample reason to doubt that we believe Jesus is Lord. They see that some of us are so self-interested and so self-protective that we will ally ourselves with someone who violates all that is sacred to us. Do you understand what that's saying? That Christians who are falling victims, who are becoming the prey of Donald Trump's rhetoric, are not being good Christians. Now, I'm not Christian. Quite honestly, I don't really care about analyzing Donald Trump specifically from a Christian lens, but many people do. And Christianity Today is spot on. How can you disagree with them that there is nothing Christian, there is nothing representative about what Christian values should be about the Donald Trump campaign? And when I turn on CNN and I see Kayleigh McEnany, Trump supporter, wearing her gold or whatever kind of cross necklace that she wears on every show, and hear her defend Donald Trump in terms of the comments he made about grabbing women's pussies when he wants, defending Donald Trump last night as I was watching TV, Don Lemon, defending Trump in light of all of these allegations about sexual assault, which don't run contrary to anything Trump has ever said, but rather just are representative of what Trump is on record as having said for a long time. I say to myself, what's Christian about Donald Trump, and how can a self-professed Christian like Kayleigh McEnany or whoever it is that's saying I'm voting for Trump because he's the Christian candidate? It's just really disturbing, Pat, because there's nothing Christian about this guy, is there?
And to the best of my knowledge, he's still leading in the polls amongst evangelicals.
Yeah.
And it's because they always have that excuse in their back pocket that, well, we promote forgiveness and redemption, so we're going to give him a pass on this one.
Yeah, except Trump's not born again, right? I mean, with George W. Bush, you could at least, I think this is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? I mean, I'm not defending this in any way. This is completely crazy, but you could at least have a credible case that in spite of all the bad stuff that George W. Bush did, he was born again. He's a born again Christian. And by the internal logic of being born again, we now have this rebirth and we're starting from scratch with George W. Bush. Okay, I don't buy into this, but some people do. Trump's not a born again Christian. I mean, he basically found his Christianity 15 months ago or 18 months ago, whenever he started running for president, saying that the Bible is his second favorite book or first favorite book alongside The Art of the Deal, the book that someone else ghost wrote for him. The only thing in common, really, between Trump's book, Art of the Deal, and the Bible is that neither were written by Trump and are books that maybe he's glanced at some point in his life. But that's about it. And there's not even a bogus, seemingly credible case because, as you're pointing out, Trump is not born again, right? Why are we just saying, oh, we'll skip everything Trump did because it was a while ago?
It's like they're trying to find a reason to still support him.
Yeah.
Despite that fact, yeah.
It's digging pretty deep, and I think it is all imploding. I mean, it's all coming off the walls. It is crumbling right now for Trump, and we only have a couple of weeks left, and then we're going to see how this thing shapes up. Discuss this on our Reddit discussion forum by going to davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Bruce Schneier, who is a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Bruce, later on in today's program, we're going to talk about the recent revelations regarding Yahoo and email. But you recently commented on other corporate denial statements, other companies rushing to say, we're absolutely not doing that. And I think to summarize your view on some of those denials is skeptical, an understatement. You seem to think that this is more common than what we've heard so far. Is that right?
It probably is. Certainly we know that the NSA co-ops corporate surveillance regularly. Sometimes they use court orders, what seems to be in the Yahoo case. Sometimes they just steal the data. We know that happened with Google and their overseas data centers. Sometimes they will buy it. Sometimes they will use threats. And when you read some of these corporate denials, they tend to be very carefully worded, and always look at the wording and the parsing, because my guess is this is much more prevalent than a particular news story, and we just hear about little bits and pieces of what's a very pervasive surveillance program.
You've spoken about pretty extensively this idea that you actually gave a TED Talk called The Security Mirage, where you talk about security trade-offs. And very often when we hear a story like we do about, authorities, agencies were reading people's email even before they read the email, for example, very often the average sort of person will think about it in terms of, does this sort of feel like I'm getting more security relative to how much privacy I'm losing? What's the sort of fundamental problem with thinking about these news stories and these surveillance techniques sort of in this amorphous, does it feel like a good trade-off method? What's wrong with that?
Trade-off's probably a good way to think about it, but it's not security versus privacy. It's security versus security. So we know that pervasive surveillance by government makes citizens insecure. I mean, that's why we don't all move to China or didn't all move to East Germany or former Iraq. That government surveillance is toxic for governments to do, and it is toxic for populations to be subjected to, which is why when we built the United States Constitution, we put in very strong rules about police surveillance and how it had to be tailored and targeted and minimal and necessary. These programs fly in the face of that, and that makes us less secure. I mean, we're not saying that the FBI or the NSA shouldn't conduct surveillance. It's that broad surveillance of populations is bad for our security. And on top of that, it doesn't actually give us security against criminals and terrorists and all those other things. That's sort of the other half of it. So it's really the way to look at it. And unfortunately, this is hard, because when people are scared, they're willing to say, do whatever it takes to make me feel less scared. Even though it might be ineffective, even though it might be corrosive, people are willing to go along with it.
I'm going to get into the details later in the program about some of the past fines that Yahoo was a victim of with regard to not participating in PRISM. But can you talk to us a little generally from your knowledge? What are some of the ways, or maybe a better way to say it is, how prevalent is it that government agencies will try to strong-arm some of these big tech companies that have a lot of data into playing ball with them, either in terms of data turnover or backdoors, et cetera? How does that function in the real world?
We don't know a lot of the details. We just see snippets of it. So we know in one case, the NSA bribed RSA to put a backdoor in one of their encryption systems. So we know that. We know that a lot comes from legal compulsion. We saw the Verizon order. That was one of the Snowden documents. Now we're seeing this Yahoo demand. We see bits from different companies' transparency reports. My guess is that when you had the more traditional companies, the telcos, there was a tradition of playing along. So we know that the NSA put massive eavesdropping equipment in AT&T's data centers around the country. And they did that by asking nicely. But AT&T had a history of cooperating with the NSA throughout the Cold War. So this was just an easy thing to do. When they did the same thing to a company like Google, Google probably said, go away, we're not going to do that, which is why they had to resort to other mechanisms. So I think there's a lot of culture between the telco culture and the Silicon Valley culture, the differences. And it's a lot about relationships. You want to help. If you're approached by the US government and told there's an attack imminent, please help keep America safe, it's hard to say no. But it shouldn't be hard to say get a warrant. It shouldn't be hard to say go before a judge, follow the law, and then we will help.
Would you feel differently about a lot of this if instead of knowing that particularly the bulk surveillance that was exposed by the Snowden leaks and subsequently by the initially incorrect statements of the NSA regarding how effective this type of surveillance is, would you feel differently, broadly speaking, about this type of surveillance if we found out it really was effective at preventing real life violence, terrorist attacks, etc.?
Well, the Fourth Amendment's always about trade-offs. And we'd have to look at that. And if it turned out that these tools were extraordinarily effective, we would have to look at the cost, look at the benefits, and make a trade-off. I mean, if you think about it, we already give the police extraordinary power to peer into our personal lives. Why? Because we know it solves crimes. We know it keeps us safe. We just have mechanisms around that to ensure that the police don't abuse their authority, and more or less they work. So it really isn't absolute. It's about figuring out what the limits are and figuring out how to give authorities these capabilities without losing our liberties, without losing our freedoms. And we can do that. We've done that in the past. We can do it in the future. But we have to have the facts to make these decisions as a society.
I'd like to talk a little bit with you about computer security in the context of the upcoming election. And every election, there are a sort of broad range of different concerns and allegations that crop up regarding often the tampering of voting machines. Donald Trump has been more frequently using the term rigged, and whether it applies exclusively to voting machines, it appears the answer is no, but that may be part of it. From a computer security perspective, when we think about a national election, which is really 50 individual state elections, often managed in pretty drastically different ways, what are the concerns that everybody should sort of generally be aware of when it comes to computer security?
When I think about the election and security, there are three areas that I worry about.
Yeah.
The first one is a registration system, that a lot of havoc can be wreaked by deleting or changing voter rolls. People try to vote and they can't because they're not on the system. There have been probes in several states. There have been tests, a lot of shoddy security there. The second is the election machines themselves. A lot of them are vulnerable to hacking, some of them in key states, especially the ones that are touchscreen only without paper audit trails. And the third is the tabulation and dissemination, that after we vote, those totals are sent up the chain and aggregated. And there's a lot of room for attacks there. So looking at those three steps, those are the vulnerabilities. And I think we need to really apply some technology here. It's a bit late for this election. We have to really pay attention and use humans to try to secure our system. But I worry about Russian involvement. I worry about kids playing politics. I think these are important concerns, less in the presidential election, more in local elections where little changes can make a big difference. But I think we have to worry about our election system and whether it is critical national infrastructure in the same way our power grid is. And I think you can make a case that it is.
From a purely sort of logistical and technical standpoint, of the three areas of concern that you mentioned, which would be the easiest for sort of a lone wolf to affect, and which might be more on the spectrum of requiring a coordinated effort?
You know, pretty much everything can be done by a lone wolf. I mean, this is the thing about computer security. It doesn't require a nation state to do it. It could be two guys in a basement somewhere. So that really isn't the factor. What really matters is whether it will be effective. You know, and if you think about it, if you wanted to swing the U.S. presidential election, it's not easy. You're not going to know where the hinge points will be. You can't do a lot of swinging because, you know, it'll be noticed. More worrisome are local elections, state elections, city elections, county elections, where there are much fewer eyes on it, where the stakes are smaller, where there's more petty infighting. I worry there more. If you think what's happening about this election, we're seeing Russia do kind of a disinformation campaign, which really isn't attacking the election, but attacking the information process leading up to the election. And that's something that a nation state might do. You know, we talk a lot about election vulnerabilities, and they're serious. Pulling it off is still a lot of luck and a lot of skill. And I think that's in our favor, but we really should secure our systems because we don't have a process if there's a problem. I mean, we don't have a system to vote over a week later,
right,
to fix it. If we open up the machines and the votes are all 0-0, we just don't know what to do. And after an election, there are sides. Now we can discuss what to do and nobody cares. The day after election day, half of the country is going to say fix it, other half is going to say don't fix it, it's fine. Right? It'll become partisan. So whatever we do, we have to do now before we know the results.
No doubt about that. We've been speaking with Bruce Schneier. He is a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Really a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It turns out that Yahoo was letting the NSA read your email even before you opened it. Yahoo Inc. last year secretly built a custom software program to search all of its customers' incoming email for specific information provided by U.S. intelligence officials. The company complied with a classified U.S. government demand, and what they would do is scan hundreds of millions of Yahoo Mail accounts at the request of the National Security Agency or FBI. And this is all according to 3 former employees and a 4th person who knew about this. There are some surveillance experts who are saying this is the first time that we're seeing a U.S. internet company agreeing to an intelligence agency's request by searching all arriving messages as opposed to examining stored messages or scanning a small number of accounts in real time. Let me translate in layman's terms. Yahoo was scanning the messages and reporting to the NSA about those messages before the recipients even read them. Now, it's not known specifically what information intelligence officials were looking for, only that they wanted Yahoo to search for a set of characters. This could be a phrase in an email, some kind of a phrase or wording in an attachment. Unclear exactly what it means, but this is sort of the gist of it. And Reuters was not able to figure out what Yahoo may have handed over. So if we sort of imagine a tiered system, you've got all Yahoo email being scanned by these filters. Then you have some specific words, phrases, or signatures that were being looked for. And then you have some portion of that, and it could be 100% of that, being turned over to authorities. Now, it's known that U.S. phone and internet companies are known to hand over bulk customer data to intelligence agencies, but there are some former government officials and private surveillance experts who said they have never seen or heard of such broad, real-time scanning, collection, and reporting of customer emails and data. And as soon as this happened, as I sort of mentioned earlier in my interview with Bruce Schneier, Microsoft, Twitter, Google, Facebook, Apple, they all very quickly put out statements saying, oh, we don't do anything like this. We haven't received requests like this. We haven't complied with requests like this. As Bruce Schneier mentioned in our interview earlier in today's show, he is skeptical of that, to say the least. And Apple specifically pointed to a recent statement made by their CEO, Tim Cook, which said, I want to be absolutely clear that we have never worked with any government agency from any country to create a backdoor in any of our products or services. We have also never allowed access to our servers, and we never will. Here's the way in which the wording is so important. This is what Bruce Schneier was referring to. If we look at this statement from Apple, now this is all speculative, I want to be clear. If you look at what he says, we have never worked with a government agency to create a backdoor. Okay, that might mean they created the backdoor on their own without working with a government agency, or that they worked with the government agency to provide data in a way that isn't through a backdoor, right? This is why Bruce Schneier is saying these denials need to be looked at really closely. And his last sentence, we have also never allowed access to our servers and we never will. Well, you can very, very easily mirror what is on your servers or parts of it onto some other shared server that Apple and the NSA might have shared access to. And you would be right. You have never allowed the NSA access to your servers, but it doesn't really represent the spirit of what it is Tim Cook is saying. I'm not saying this is what Apple was doing. I merely want to have the conversation with you about how these are worded in a way where anything could really be going on. Meanwhile, Yahoo put out a statement that doesn't deny that the program exists. They're not really denying any of this. It's a pretty milquetoast and generic statement. And this is really, really concerning. And it might be interesting for you to know that At one point, Yahoo was fined for not participating in PRISM, which was another one of these sort of surveillance security type initiatives. They were fined for not participating at one point in the past. And now we learn they are participating in a different way, in a way that exceeds even our wildest expectations of what was going on. So very, very concerning stuff from Yahoo. Sticking with Yahoo, I want to also talk to you about allegations that Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer purged male workers. Melissa Meyer. Yes. Man, I cannot get that right. Marissa Meyer.
Marissa Meyer.
Yes. I think I got it now, right? We'll start over. No, just kidding. We're going to keep going. There's a lawsuit alleging Scott Ard was a media executive who was fired from Yahoo last year, and he's filed a lawsuit accusing CEO Marissa Meyer of leading a campaign to get rid of male workers, okay? The lawsuit says that Meyer encouraged and fostered using an internal performance rating system that Yahoo had to accommodate the subjective biases of management, which Scott Ard alleges were to get rid of men and to bring in women. And Ard's lawsuit also says that Yahoo illegally fired large numbers of workers through a system imposed by Mayer. So let's look at a quote here. I want to start with this. This is from the Scott Ard lawsuit against Yahoo. When Savitt began at Yahoo, the top managers reporting to her, including the chief editors of the verticals and magazines, were less than 20% female. Within a year and a half, those top managers were more than 80% female. Savitt has publicly expressed support for increasing the number of women in media and has intentionally hired and promoted women because of their gender, while terminating, demoting, or laying off male employees because of their gender. Of the approximately 16 senior-level editorial employees hired or promoted by Savitt in approximately an 18-month period, 14 of them, or 87%, were female. Now, Yahoo categorically denies the allegations. When I heard this, I initially thought, this is just the old boys club swinging the other way and balancing things out, but that is not what the allegations are at all. The allegations accuse that Yahoo fired senior editorial staff and basically replaced them with women to go from 20% female to 80% female in 18 months. In addition, this is not the first lawsuit of its kind against Yahoo. Now, we're ultimately going to sort out what happened. I really have a problem with people calling this reverse sexism, if it is true. That's a term that gets thrown around. Sexism is sexism, right? If you are making fires and hires merely on the basis of gender, that is just sexism. This idea of reverse doesn't make sense to me. Now, many people on opposing sides are furious here. I'm getting emails from the anti-feminists and the so-called men's rights activists. They're saying, David, you probably, but many people are not taking this seriously because it's about men rather than women. If it was reversed, if someone came in and fired the women and hired men, it would be front page news on all corporate media. But there's also another side where I have feminists angry because they say, nobody should be mad here. This is just evening the playing field. And why would anybody be mad? Well, if the lawsuit is accurate, 80% women by firing men that were already there, that's not exactly leveling the playing field. So we're going to follow this and see where it ends up. The allegations are incredibly serious. And listen, social justice warrior, men's rights activist, all these terms that get thrown around. I'm a progressive. I'm not going to ignore the story because it appears that gender was used as a basis for firing and hiring. It doesn't matter to me whether it's men being fired or hired or women being fired or hired. If this is going on, I am going to report on it. I already have, and keep all of the buzzwords to yourselves because they really have no place here. I'm covering the story and I'll continue to follow it. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Today's voicemail is really, really short and sweet. Let's take a listen.
David, get a life.
That could mean any number of things, but clearly somebody, and you might have been able to tell from their accent, we could tell from the caller ID, they are from the south of the United States, clearly somebody that does not appreciate the hard work, Pat, that goes into this program, does he?
It makes me wonder what's going on with his life, too, if all he has to do is call into the show.
What are you doing day to day, buddy? That's so great that you call me and tell me to get a life. I'd like to know that. On today's bonus show, we will talk about an airline introducing child-free zones. This is very, very interesting. I think I like some element of this. We will talk about Generation Adderall. I know there are people in our audience who are going to find that story interesting. And I will give you an update on the David Pakman Show 2017 calendar. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. But there's only one way to get access to that bonus show. You might have heard me mention this before. It's davidpakman.com/membership. And you can use, if you want to get a discount off of your membership, you can use coupon code HATRIOT40. That's HATRIOT40. 40% discount off of your membership with the coupon code. Sign up. We'll talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.